an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Wizard's Holiday, Chapter 5. In this chapter, the guests who are going to be staying at Dairine's house arrive, and I was assuming that they were all going to be from the same place. Not only are they not, but they are extremely different in species type, overall temperament, customs of their own regions, and one of them appears to be Justin Bieber. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Yama for commissioning this episode. So, guys, guess what Justin Bieber's name is? It's Roshaun. It makes me so uncomfortable. I really hate it. And, it's not the same spelling, but it is the same spelling as the people who fuck up Roshaun's name all the time when they write to me. A lot of people spell her name like that. So, yeah, I just could not. That fucking killed me. But I am getting ahead of myself. Yama says, I know, right? I laughed so hard, and he's the worst. He's the worst. Yama, remind me, you said that you're reading along with me. You haven't read ahead that far. I know that last time you had read this chapter already, so you knew some things. But how are you just reading the one book while I'm covering it? Or are you reading completely along with me chapter at a time? I'm just curious because I'm always interested in whether the people who are commenting have the same perspective that I do, or whether they have some advanced knowledge that I haven't got yet. Because sometimes they're just, giving me their perspective and they are as unspoiled as me. Yama says, no, I'm reading along, just overread last time. Oh, gotcha. Okay, cool. So yeah, Roshaun is you know what? I said I'm going to start at the beginning. I am. So we start off with Dairine, and she is waiting for everybody. And we get a sort of, it's not even an internal monologue. It's just her sort of reflecting on how her entire life she had been waiting and feeling impatient and wishing shit would get a move on and be done within the time frame that she wanted it done. And I love this mention of how when she realized that she was a wizard, she sort of expected that this meant an end to waiting, and that having this power would free her from being at the mercies of time. And it is not so. This is something that I personally cannot relate to that much, because while I can be impatient about some things, I actually tend to be more patient in general than a lot of people I know. I am very willing to just sit back and let it ride out and see what happens. And I have never really considered myself a patient person until I have been around impatient people and realized how alien their reactions are. So Dairine's attitude here is something that, while I understand intellectually what this is like, I don't personally identify with it very much, because I'm not somebody who likes to move super fast in general. And I mean that physically and figuratively. So let's see. Entropy was running, and in an environment conditioned by the never-ending battle against that ancient enemy, not even wizardry could necessarily make your wishes come true. There were other compensations. On her ordeal, and after it, she had seen things few other human beings had been privileged to see. And she's then thinking, maybe when I'm older, maybe by the time I'm 20, I'll have this licked. And I'm like, oh, sweetie, that's a lifelong battle. Anything that's that ingrained in your personality, you are just going to have to fight that forever. And you'll never beat it because nothing is ever done. You may get to a point where you are certainly more in control of yourself than you used to be, but it's never done and beaten, you know? So I love to, reminder, listening to the audiobooks, I love the voice that the narrator puts on for Spot, her computer. I don't know what it is, but she really nails what I sort of imagine and didn't even realize I was imagining. If you guys have a chance to listen to the audiobook, despite the fact that the way it's structured is really weird, I do think that she does a pretty good job with all the voices. So let's see. The background thought that was both Spot's and that of the far distant wizardly machine intelligence to which Dairine was a sort of godmother, and with which she had been affiliated since passing her ordeal. Sometimes that distant activity of mind, half manual, half living thing, looked out through Dairine's eyes and lived with her at what it considered an incredibly leisurely pace, thinking thoughts in entire seconds rather than in milliseconds. But mostly it went about its own business at its own speed, a blur of thought of which only the high points emerged in Dairine's consciousness. Now, in that mode, Spot said, "It's not as if they're using a private gating complex. There may be delays at the other end." And at this point, Dairine's like, all right, let me just look at the briefing pack and I will distract myself from waiting for these guys. And this is when we get a description of each of the guests that will be coming. So, the first one, and I love this, they have like sort of 3D live images. And even so, she's aware that sometimes like imaging technology is not actually accurate, and the way that somebody looks in person isn't going to be how they came across in a photo. But still, it's pretty close. The rear hate was more like a giant metallic purple centipede, one of 24 of its parents' first brood, and very newly become a wizard, within the past rear hate year, which was about 2 Earth years. It was interested enough in other worlds and other scalia of wizardry to have applied for this excursus almost as soon as it hit post-ordeal status. It was probably incorrect. Scarret, that being the part of his names Dairine could most easily pronounce, the rest being all consonants, was more or less a he. So then we get this other guy who she's like, I don't know what it is, but I think he's a he too. And she thinks that it's the berries. And apparently he kind of looks like a Christmas tree covered with berries. On his world, Demisive, there were walking trees, but walking probably wasn't the right word for it. They got around anyway, and could be surprisingly mobile when they needed to be. As far as Dairine could tell from the manual's description of the Demisive people, they spent all their lives wading around through the ground, and the whole surface of their sealess planet was one great migratory forest, with mighty bands of trees rooting only briefly, and then getting on the move again, hunting other skies to grow under, new ground to grow in. And then she goes to Roshaun, and there's a lot of name, which I absolutely will never say. And the entry beside the live image is this dude who's like really, really attractive. And her first thought is like, I'm glad Nita's not here. And for a second I was like, why? And then I was like, oh, she's like imagining that they'd be competitive over him. I think, right? So he was handsome, almost perfectly so. And it was the disbelief in his apparent perfection that kept Dairine looking at him rather longer than she intended. He had a long, fair-skinned face with a very thoughtful expression. This was partially concealed by surprisingly long blonde hair, most of which was tied behind his head, but he also had very long bangs, which he was probably always pushing out of his eyes, and a long lock of hair hanging down in front of each ear. The eyes were a startling green, a shade not normally achieved on Earth without the assistance of contact lenses. Now, guys, I am picturing Link. I don't know where this came from, but Link is immediately who popped into my head. Link with a Justin Bieber-esque sort of attitude, which is a wild combo, but there it is. He's definitely a looker, Dairine thought. Though the handsomeness was a little less striking now on her second or third glance than it had been at the first. What's with his name, though? It goes on and on. She scanned down the planet's entry, skipping the usual information about size and location and so forth. And she gets interrupted here because I really want to know about his planet also. And we don't really get information about this. Oh, Yama says, such a weird idea to have a tree as a being that moves like humans. I'm not sure if I like it. Trees are so majestic and making them humanoid. Meh. Yeah, I keep thinking about Ents and that he's like a very small Ent. Because of the same way that Ents sort of like wade through the earth, you know? But I do like the thing that I mainly enjoy about these books is as much as they are fantasy, there is so much sci-fi mixed in with it. And it's such non-traditional sci-fi because so much science fiction is very focused on the technology that is required to achieve travel. And because these books don't need it, it still manages to be fantasy, you know, and that really is its focus. It's a very interesting sort of like genre breaker in some ways. And I think it's really fun the ways that Diane Duane has like played around with our expectations of what different species are probably like, what we're used to. And I've said this before about the descriptions of like the I can't remember the name of the spot where that's like the crossroads, but I mentioned how she describes all of the like booths as adjusting to whatever body type you have, because it's just meant to be inclusive of all of these different wild types of being. And some of them aren't even necessarily solid, you know, like some of them are sort of like gelatinous or liquid based or like an energy. And so that is just, this is the kind of thing that I feel Doctor Who was sort of trying to do, but they never really quite got into the fun part. They always got stuck on, I mean, the biggest thing for me, the biggest hang up is the fact that they could never quite get away from Daleks and Cybermen. So because of that, I feel like it really held them back. But also, they didn't have access to like effects that one would need. They had to use human people in makeup and costumes and suits and stuff like that, which also dramatically inhibits what you can do. And I do have some sympathy for that. I can't help but wonder what cool ideas they came up with that they were like, okay, there's just no way to do this, you know? But I do really enjoy how much this trio differs from one another. We have something that's very sort of insectoid, but also eats everything. As we see later, it doesn't seem to differentiate between food and like inanimate objects. It's like a goat that just, it would eat through the floor if you let it. It would eat the cabinet doors. It would eat the table. It doesn't seem to be able to tell the difference because maybe where it's from, it doesn't matter, which is wild. What does that look like? Every place, like anything that you imagine how it eats, you just assume that there's a difference between what it eats and it doesn't eat. That it knows, oh, this is food, this isn't. But something about this, it's just like, oh, it just consumes whatever's around it. And evidently, that's fine. It does get the nutrition it needs somehow. I don't know. Then there's this tree guy who like roots in the earth in order to get the nutrients that he needs. So she winds up like sort of turning him over to her dad, who's the florist and the guy who's doing the garden, in order to give him a patch of soil that's like acidic enough for him to enjoy. And it's such a very different approach. And I just love this idea of like, the whole point of exchange programs is to become aware of things that you take for granted as being a part of the way you live, and how particularly privileged you might be, or simply how different your situation is from theirs. And this is a really fun and extremely exaggerated version of that. So Tree Guy, he finds out that they eat vegetables. And he is devastated. Now, I have so many questions about this. Because here's the thing. If you root in the earth is made on our planet of decayed matter. It's all, decayed plant matter, animal matter, whatever, that has been broken down and made into like its most basic units to be somehow absorbed for the nutrients are meant to be absorbed from it. What does this tree guy eat when he's rooted in earth at his planet? What is soil made from on his planet? Are there not plants that die that he's then consuming? What is it? Like, I really wanted them to ask these questions, and instead they sort of sidestep the question because they don't want to upset him. I'll be honest, I don't feel like that's the right move. I understand that one can be sensitive to your guest and not want to upset them. I'm not mad about trying to like keep him from freaking out. But I definitely felt like if you brought him out into the garden and you showed him the kind of plant you eat, let's say you just had an herb growing, a basil plant, and you showed him like, this is the kind of plant we eat, I feel like that would be a really good example of this is a different type of being than you are. As a wizard, he would have to be able to tell that, right? Not to mention the fact that due to the way that I don't want to say like non-sentient, because everything has its own kind of sentience in this world, but lesser sentient, subsentient, I don't know what the word is I want. But if you like talk to the things in this universe, they tell you what they want to do, right? So a doorknob wants to turn to let you in. A refrigerator wants to be filled with food to feed you. If you go to a potato, is that potato going to like really want you to eat it? That's the sort of assumption I have here. The energy of plants that are grown for food is that they want to be food because that's their job and they are looking forward to nourishing you. So I feel like, can't we just bring our guy out and introduce him to some vegetables that are like, no, yeah, I really want to be made into a salad. How about that lettuce that was in the fridge that didn't get eaten? And he was sad that he didn't get eaten. That was the whole point, is that Nita says to her dad later, there are some things that would rather get eaten than be wasted, right? So I think that if they had decided to handle this differently, they could have shown him the difference between what he imagines and what the reality is for them on their planet specifically. And that's the point of these kinds of programs, is getting to find out that the way you assume all of this works when you arrive somewhere and you hear something described a certain way isn't actually necessarily the reality once you investigate further and find out culturally how this works, how it's perceived, or the various ways in which it's treated by people. Like, there are things that, you know, different customs and whatnot that some of us might think are really either just strange or maybe sometimes cruel. Like, there are certain ceremonies that have sacrifices of animals, for example. But when you watch those ceremonies, as much as the idea of like an animal sacrifice sounds off-putting, you can see that the people who do this take it very seriously, have a great deal of compassion, and are treating this creature as a sacred animal. And they truly care about making this painless and doing this in a way that is respectful. And so I just think that this would have been a really good opportunity for them to sort of be like, okay, dude, look, I understand that you're upset, but I need you to step back and hear how this goes. And instead, they just sort of like back away from the issue and then sidestep it for the rest of the evening. And I kept waiting for them to have a talk with him about it, and they don't. And I don't know if that's going to come up again. I sort of hope that it will, and that he'll begin to understand, because if their entire visit, Dairine and her dad have to kind of distract this guy and low-key lie to him a little, that'll be a bummer for everybody. It's a missed opportunity, in my opinion. So anyway, Yama says, I think it's more like eating a live plant instead of absorbing recycled nutrients. Yeah, I mean, and again, assuming that on his planet that's even how it works. It may not be, you know, things are wild out in these streets. But yeah, I'm hopeful that, like, because the reaction that he has of just pure horror, you'll have that sometimes to things that you find out are traditional in a certain place, and you just be like, that is really fucked up. And that's part of learning. That's part of opening your mind to other things, is you roll with your gut reaction and you follow it and you see where things go. And sometimes in the end, you're like, no, yeah, that's fucked up. And I maintain that that is fucked up, and my opinion has not changed. But sometimes it does. And I just feel like that would be a good thing to check out with him. Also, I just really like him, and I don't want him to be upset. And I don't think he would be if they explained it further. So it's also partially just me thinking, in the long run, this will turn a corner and he will be happier than he would be constantly wondering subconsciously. He has to be sort of aware that they don't really address what he's asking, you know? So I feel like that will create a sort of undercurrent of unease. And I would like for him to feel secure and safe and know that they're not thinking about eating him, for example. So anyway, she gets interrupted by everybody's arrival. And we find out that, like, the way that the backyard is set up, her dad has created this sort of area that is wild enough that it's hard for neighbors to get a view in. And that way she and Nita can, like, appear and disappear from this particular area and nobody's going to be able to tell. So this is where they have told folks to arrive. So here comes the rear hate. The body wasn't a series of smooth sections, but looked rather as if a number of metallic purple beach balls had been stuck together, flattening a little at the ends. Then someone had attached 3 pairs of legs to each beach ball, 2 pointing down, a third pointing up. And at one end of the centipede, stalk eyes were fastened to the top of the last beach ball, and there were some scissory mouth parts underneath. And when he lands, he's like checking out the gravity, trying to look around, and as she recognizes in him, he's attempting to look casual and cool, like he's not completely flipped out, even though he's definitely flipped out. And she's sort of like, oh, I recognize that. So she greets him. Are you Scarrett? That's me. And you'd be Dairine? Dairine, she said. Maybe you want to move over. But the Rihate was already pouring himself out of the circle and over toward Dairine. So let's see. She asks how the trip went, and he's like, hurry up and wait, which is what everybody says. But yeah, that seems to be a common thing. And she starts laughing, and he looks at her and says, sorry? And she's like, no, this is laughter. It's a happy sound. And I was sort of surprised that she had to explain that, because using the speech, I thought, was like going to give an impression of what laughter is as well. But I sort of like that not everything is just completely taken care of in the speech. Laughter is like it's not exactly words. So I'm fine with that. There was another even more demure explosion of air, more a pop than anything else, and there stood a tree. Die still, Dairine said, and was delighted to see the branches of the tree shiver in unison and look at her with all their berries. Die, the tree said. I hope you'll forgive me, Dairine said, but your name's kind of a mouthful for me. Will Philip be all right? We use that at home, Philip said. His voice was absolutely the rustling of wind and leaves. Dairine wondered how he did it, because all she could see were needles, which wouldn't rustle terribly well. The tree part seemed fine. Dairine cast a glance down at his roots and saw they were shrouded in a kind of portable haze. She recognized this instantly as a decency field, used by some wizards to conceal a part of themselves they didn't feel it appropriate to show to other people, either of their own species or another one. I love this for some reason. It's like his roots are his privates, and he's just like, you don't need to see that. He can't exactly wear trunks or pants, but he can put up a little bit of a glamour, so to speak, and just be like, that's not for you. I just found this super funny. And when she asks, is there anything you need? He says, no, I'm fine. There was a diffident sound to his voice that made Dairine wonder whether this was strictly the truth, but he was using the speech, so it couldn't be a lie. And I'm curious about that. Is it like, that feels like there is something going on, and he's like actually fine in the moment, but there feels like there's some concern starting for him already. And then she's like, speaking of which, where's our third guy? And all of a sudden there's this bang. Compared to everybody else's arrival, he is much more dramatic. And it's a combination for me of, is he kind of less good at wizardry? Is this meant to be as dramatic as it is? Or is it a consequence of him being a little incompetent? Also, is it showing off? And is it rude? Because to me, if you're coming to a planet that you should have researched, which we find out like repeatedly, he does not know anything about Earth. He isn't prepared. It would be customary to, if you find out that wizardry needs to be hidden, to make your entrance gently, with as little fanfare as possible, to avoid anybody else noticing. He does not seem to care about that, and I can't tell if it's just because he didn't do the research and he doesn't know, because he pure does not care, or if this was a purposeful effort to make a big entrance. I want to know. So he was nearly as tall as Dairine's dad and was dressed in what even Dairine was willing to describe as splendid robes. He was wearing an undertunic and hose and boots in some golden fabric. There was an overtunic or long jacket in scarlet, all embroidered in gold, and he was wearing gauntlets of gold and a strange sort of scarf of gold over the outer jacket. And there was a fillet of gold bound around his head, but it was a more reddish gold, which wonderfully set off all that hair, which it turned out went right down his back and was long enough for him to sit on. There he stood, looking around imperiously at all of them, his thumbs hooked in the broad golden belt under the overtunic. Dairine's first thought, which she couldn't control, was, noisy arrival, sloppy technique. Maybe it's something cultural dressing up so fancy? Yeah, sure, he's showing off. Why? And he looks around and says, and where's the welcoming committee? bitch, you're not welcome. Get out. Like, I hate him immediately. And I love how Dairine is like more mature than me in some ways here, because she keeps mentally criticizing him and then being like, what is wrong with me? And I'm like, what is wrong with you? Dairine, he sucks. There's nothing wrong with you. This isn't a you problem. He's the worst. You are being totally reasonable. But she is so like aware of her own sorts of not even just biases, but the knee-jerk reaction she's having, that she is constantly feeling as if she's failing a little bit, that she should be more compassionate, that she should be more patient. And there, to a point, there is something about that is so sweet. You know what I mean? That I really want to like, I wish I was more that way. That when I don't like somebody, I ask myself what my problem is. And don't get me wrong, that has happened. I think that's happened to all of us, where there is just a person, and this is not one of those cases. So I'm just going to say this. It seems like Dairine's treating it like it's one of these cases. And I don't think it is, but I'm giving this example. When you meet somebody that otherwise seems to be perfectly nice, they're saying the right things, they're showing interest in asking you questions, they're sharing things about themselves, there's nothing offensive about them, they're not saying anything rude or mean, and yet you just don't like them. Little things they do irritate you. The way they phrase things gets to you, feels passive aggressive, even though you're pretty sure it's not actually meant that way, but you feel like it is. And you know it's probably you and your baggage, but there's just this thing that sort of rears up when they talk, and you're just like, wow, why am I reacting like this? I think we've all had that. And it's a really startling thing when you come across it as somebody who you like. We all sort of like to think of ourselves as reasonable people. And when you come across a person who brings out this part of you that is distinctly unreasonable, it can be really upsetting in a way to find out that like you have the same kinds of bullshit baggage as anybody. And it's just that you don't always run into somebody who can trigger it. But this person has exactly the personality type to push your buttons, your specific buttons. You know, that can happen. And it's awful. I hate not liking somebody when I feel like there isn't really a good reason not to like them. I am aware when that's happening. This dude, that's not what's happening, Dairine. He is being snide. He is being outright rude. And there is more than one occasion in which I wish she would just ask what he meant by that. There's no need for her to get super intense about it. But when he says, at one point, he's talking about the grounds, and he says, our groundskeepers would be, I think he says, like, punished for this, or something like this, disciplined. I would turn around and ask, for what? Is there a problem? And just really kind of get him to hear himself. Because that's how I roll. And I don't necessarily think that that's out of line. Because if you're going to visit a totally alien planet, you don't get to criticize anything. That's just a fucking, in my opinion, that should be how it rolls. So I would love it. I really would, if she would just say something. But she doesn't do that. And I don't know if she will. Because she's taking it really like I said, she's treating it as if this is something that's wrong with her. That her reaction to him is like inexplicable. It's the most natural thing. He's being constantly insulting. He's insinuating all the time that everything is below his standard. Dairine, there's nothing wrong with taking that personally, you know? So, yeah, where's the welcoming committee? She just, like, greets him. And, let's see. When she says Daistio, they normally reply with Dai. He does not. He just says, yes, may you also go well. What's up? I feel like that's significant. The fact that he doesn't say it back in the speech. That's not to say he's not using the speech here, because he is, obviously. They have to communicate with one another. They don't speak the same language. But what the fuck? Right? I don't know. That just feels significant to me somehow. And he says, and you would be? And she does push back a little here initially, which I hoped was going to continue. You're the newcomer, Dairine said, and I am your host. It's for you to introduce yourself. Where this made-up rule had come from, she had no idea, but she felt disinclined to make things easy for this guy. And this is when he gives his full ass name, which, like I said, I'm not fucking repeating. He looked at her as if he expected her to know what it meant. Pleased to meet you, cousin, Dairine said, feeling that it was just barely true, and desperately hoping that at some point it would be more so. But at the moment she was having all kinds of doubts. I'm Dairine Callahan. Welcome to Earth. This is perhaps a public park? And she explains that no, this is attached to the house. The other two immediately are just like, oh yes, we understand, you know, because she's mentioning about how like wizardry has to be kept hidden here. That's a shame for you, isn't it? The rear hate said, I'm sorry about your trouble. I love that. Just being like, oh, that really sucks. Like, yeah, if you come from a planet where you can just be yourself, I imagine that finding out that there are planets where wizards have to like be secretive about it must be really jarring, you know? So let's see. Oh, she talks about here this like sort of boundary that she has created. For the first day or so, while you guys are getting used to being here, I've taken the liberty of setting up a wizardry around the perimeter so people who live in the immediate vicinity won't see anything, in case somebody's visual overlay slips. If you look around you, you can see it. I've left the perimeter visually active for anyone who uses the speech. The demissive looked up through the leaves of the tree at the shifting light of the sky above. That's fine, Philip said. We wouldn't want to frighten anybody. Come on this way, Dairine said. Oh, and this is my associate, Spot. So she introduces him. And Philip says something about how it's spring, and he loves the colors. Yeah, Dairine said. They haven't really started yet, though. In a few weeks, there'll be a lot more flowers. Oh, Roshaun said. So the look of the place will improve, then? I'm glad to hear it. At home, we would have had the groundskeepers reprimanded. That's what it was, reprimanded. At this point, genuinely, you would be fine saying something, Dairine. You really would. I don't think anybody would be mad at you for that. I just don't. However, I do deeply enjoy how later on she's like, you know what? This is part of my punishment. The powers that be are pissed because I tried some shady shit and they have given me a guest to deal with who sucks on purpose as a punishment. And I guess I just better fucking suck it up and take my licks here. And I was like, you know what? That's a pretty good point. It didn't even occur to me that would be a factor. But once she said it, I was like, oh God, okay. Yeah, that actually works. Like, it's not like they're punishing her with anything actively violent or malicious, you know, it's just somebody who sucks. And Dairine has kind of sucked recently. So maybe she's getting somebody with some personality traits that can be in some ways either similar to her or rub her the wrong way, the way that she can rub people the wrong way sometimes. And she's just going to really get to see how one may come across if one is concerned with no one but themselves. And that's not to say that Dairine is as selfish as she had been. She has certainly grown, you know, and her concern for Nita and wanting Nita to go on this trip because she can see that Nita is just exhausted, that speaks to the fact that she has grown. But Dairine, like, she's got a big ego. Speaking as somebody with a huge ego, I know one when I see one. And sometimes you need to be reminded what that looks like on somebody else so that you can cool your jets a little bit and remind yourself you don't want to fucking come across like that. And so you better get that shit under control, son. So let's see. He radiated a sense that all of this was below him somehow. I don't get it, Dairine thought. Where is he getting this attitude? All the wizards I've ever known have been nice. So, Spot asks her at this point, how many wizards have you known? That brought her up short. So, she gets interrupted on this thought. But I kind of was under the impression that she had known a fair amount. I guess not. I'm thinking about, like, Nita traveling to Ireland, and she met so many over there, and her and Kit had this mission where they were dealing with wizards who were, you know, whales and whatnot. So they've met a fair amount, but it never really occurred to me that, like, Dairine really wasn't a part of any of those. And the one thing that she did where she was exposed to a lot of other beings, she had created those beings. They were not wizards. So it was a very different situation. And once Spot asks her that, I was like, oh, yeah, I mean, good reminder. Because I just imagine her as also being acquainted with anybody that Kit and Nita are acquainted with. And that's like, why would I think that, you know? Do you have an indoor dwelling place here, or do you stay outside? His tone of speech was entirely different, suggesting a cheerful interest. So I really enjoy this, the way that they're, especially when you're listening to the audiobook, she really brings a tone to the other two characters that contrasts so sharply with Roshaun. I can't handle that his name is Roshaun. I truly can't. I thought I could do it. I don't think I can do it, guys. It's just too weird. I just don't like it. I'm going to call him Link. I'm going to do it. Okay, that's what we're doing. So let's see. And these other structures built so close to your dwelling, more members of your species live in these as well? And he's assuming that all of these houses that are so close by, they're probably only close by because they're family. And she's like, no, they're just our neighbors. And let's see, when he says, at home it wouldn't be permitted. By whom? By us, he said. Our family wouldn't want, you know, people looking at them. The word he used wasn't the plural of the one in the speech that meant person, fellow sentient being. It was one that meant a being markedly less advanced than you in the great scheme of things. Usually, the word was used affectionately, or at worst in a neutral mode, for creatures that were aware in some mode but not quite sentient. But his tone seemed to put an additional unpleasant spin on it, turning the word into something more like lowlife. Dairine stood there wondering if she was suffering from low blood sugar. It has to be me, she said. No one could be so offensive on purpose. And if he's doing it accidentally, it's not his fault. Why am I finding it so hard to cut him some slack? You don't have to cut him some slack. That's not on you. What? No one could be so offensive on purpose? Dairine, have you met people? Like, you don't even have to be an alien. Absolutely, people can be this offensive. Are you Dairine, sweetie, baby. What? anyway. And she says, it must be very lonely for you then. And he responds with, no, I wouldn't say that. The phrasing caught Dairine's attention sharply. You wouldn't say it because it would be true, she thought. That insight, if it was one, she filed away for later study. Okay, look. I understand the impulse to humanize this piece of shit dude. And maybe, by the end of this book, I'll eat my words and be like, thank God Dairine was so patient with him. But honestly, you're really reaching there, girl. I hope you did your stretches this morning because you're about to throw your back out with that one. I wouldn't say that. Oh, maybe because he doesn't want to admit at the sad, lonely existence he leads because he doesn't want to feel like what do you, girl? I wouldn't say that is a turn of phrase used frequently. Now look, the speech is a special beast. Maybe Dairine read something into that I can't understand because I'm not listening in the speech. I'm just reading his words in English. However, I think it's garbage. And I think she's attempting to excuse all kinds of behavior in a weirdly determined way that is making excuses for like the poor behavior of a dude who doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. And as a woman who has done that herself many a time, it's just, you hate to see it. That's what it comes down to. I don't want to watch another bitch do the thing that I did once upon a time where I tried to be like, well, he's just misunderstood. Maybe things are hard for him at home. Ugh. Get over it. Be a decent fucking person. Stop it. Just slap him in the face. So, Dairine, when they ask what her dad does, she says that he's a florist. Philip looked at her with many more berries than previously. A doctor? He said. Dairine paused. She translated the English word into the speech a little loosely, but it struck her as a good idea on second thought not to get into the minutiae of floristry any more clearly right now. Especially since the image suddenly rose before her mind of what her dad actually did. Yeah, my dad takes the corpses of things that grow in the ground and then arranges them in tasteful designs. I do appreciate this. The vegetables for food thing, I think, could be explained very well if they had decided to actually take that on. The florist thing, I feel, would be a little trickier because I don't know if those flowers would be like, I want to be cut and put into a vase. You know, like maybe the flowers do want to stay alive and bloom and be beautiful, and they are very sad when they are cut and made into an arrangement of some kind. But yeah, that one definitely tripped me up, I won't lie. And she says landscaping, and he's like, oh, an architect. Look, I'm going to tell you guys this right now. I think Philip is going to be my favorite character. He's just such a weird perspective, and he's so like innocent and sweet. I just want to like put him in my backyard and care for him and chat with him. I just like him. Yes, Dairine said, wishing she'd had a little more time to think about the implications of having a sentient vegetable in the house. Well, I was the one who couldn't wait to have them here, she thought. Now they're here and I'm just going to have to deal with it. So, she invites them in, asks if they want something to eat, and Scarrett is like, yeah, what have you got? I love this. So, here comes Link. Cooking? Let's see. Oh, no, that's Philip who says, cooking? What's that? What do you eat that needs to be cooked? Scarrett said. And Dairine is like, oof, okay, this is a big subject, so we're going to deal with this later. But later on, Link is like, surely you don't cook your food yourself. And she's like, yeah, we do. And it's wild to me that later on, she's sort of shocked when she finds out that this dude is a prince. Of like, what did you think? This guy's talking about how the gardeners would be reprimanded. He's talking about not cooking his own food. He showed up in an outfit that's like head to toe solid gold, and about the size of his house, and how people are only allowed to like live on the property if they're extended family. All of this is royalty shit. And yet when she finally gets to the actual explicit information that he's like some kind of princeling, she's surprised. And I'm like, why is this a surprise? Every sign was there. Like, the only thing that might be surprising is the fact that he genuinely is some sort of princeling and not just affecting this status because he is somebody who's super rich. But all of this, it's pointing to him having lots of servants and tons of space and a lot of money and whatever that looks like in the world that he lives in. So yeah, let's see. Oh yeah. And he, talks about her basement being a storage area. And when she says it's gotten a little cluttered, has it? I wouldn't be an expert in clutter. I don't even know what that means. But okay, sure. I assume it's bad. I assume it's insulting, just because I assume pretty much everything that he says is insulting. But there it is. So they take some time to get things unpacked, to get their pup tent set up, to get their world gates like locked in place on the walls. And let's see. Aren't you going to set up your gate? Dairine said. It can wait a while, Link said. I'm in no hurry. He was halfway up the stairs already, glinting golden in silhouette. Dairine raised her eyebrows and said to the other two, come on, and I'll give you the grand tour of the house. All right, listen. Here's my assertion. This motherfucker isn't sanctioned. That's what I'm saying. I don't think he is supposed to be here. He doesn't know anything about this planet. He isn't familiar the way that one would be. Like, even if he's hyper privileged, you would think that he would at least read up on where he was going and be ready for this. The fact that he doesn't put up his gate for me, and he doesn't open his pup tent either. I don't think. I think it's just the other two that do it. I don't think he has them. I'm wondering if he's like on the run, or maybe he did this without like permission from his family. I don't know. Like, she has a file on him. So that points to the fact that like somebody knew enough that he was coming to give her information. But maybe the powers that be are just trying to fuck with her a little bit. And they're like, oh, we'll give her information. We'll make this look legit, but he's definitely not supposed to be there. You know, like, I don't know. So it can wait a while. So she leads them all upstairs. And when she gets up there, this is when he says, if this is a food preparation area, it can't be meant to surface very many people. And this is when he's shocked at the fact that they cook their own food. My sister's better at it than I am, but I should be able to manage something. Scarrett was up on his hind legs, or some of them, carefully inserting a couple of claws into a cupboard door. I'll be glad to help you, he said. What's in here? Is this where you keep the food? So this is when he just yanks off a cupboard door. He spills a bunch of food because he breaks the jars and cans because he's super strong, as it turns out. So he like pops the cans in his claws because he's just like not ready for how fragile everything is. And then when Dairine's like, oh, I'll just get a mop. He's like, a mop? Why? And she's like, well, clean up. And he's like, clean up? We haven't even eaten yet. And he just fucking gets down and hoses all that shit up off the floor like a fucking Hoover. And honestly, good. Cleaning up like a broken jar that was full is a bastard. As somebody who has worked in grocery stores and has had her share of cleaning up like broken sauce jars, it sucks. So when he gets down and just starts to eat everything, he eats the glass and the cans and the food that's inside them, and he almost eats the cupboard door too. I was like, you know what? Nice. Good. I like it. And she has to stop him and be like, no, the door is part of the kitchen. And he's like, oh God, I'm so sorry. He's like really polite about it. You know, it was really cute. Carefully, he set the door down again and turned his attention downward. No, Dairine said, leave the floor. Somewhat bemused, Scarrett cocked a few eyes back at her, shrugged some of its legs, and began to levitate. Word? He's just like, oh, leave the floor? Sure, I'll leave. What a stupid joke. I found that shit really funny though, you guys. Honestly, I really did. I was like, why is he levitating? And then all of a sudden I got it and I was like, oh my God. Okay. Meanwhile, fucking Link is watching this and being like really smirky and shitty about it. Like, oh, this is good. And I'm just like, you don't get to enjoy anything. Shut up. Stop it. So this is when her dad comes home. And Dairine is kind of impressed because her dad is like keeping his cool way more than she expected. He's rolling with it. Just like, oh, hey, a tree. Nice to meet you. And when later on she accidentally mentions vegetarians and the tree freaks out, he's like, hey, buddy, what do you like to eat for dinner? Let me take you out into the garden and we'll find a nice spot for you. And just completely smooths it over. And I was like, you know what? I am pleased to see this father stepping in and doing some shit. Good. Finally. I was so irritated, you guys. I'm very pleased. So, and eventually they decide that they're going to make spaghetti for dinner because it's something that isn't going to be recognizably vegetables. And that way they can sort of sidestep the questions about what foods are. And later on when they're talking about foods, she is surprised about how her father keeps the conversation mostly about what foods taste like rather than what they actually are. Also, when he gets introduced to Link, he is not impressed. And she sees in her father the same attitude that he takes with like shitty customers. And she's like, mm-hmm. So they make some dinner. This whole thing with the vegetables. What do you want? What do you do for nourishment at home, son? Normally, we root. I've got just the place for you. You come on outside with me. Bless him. That was interesting, Link said. His tone of voice suggested not that he was trying to restrain his amusement, but that he was intending to let it loose full force as soon as he had an excuse. He found Earth funny, he found Dairine's dad funny, and he found Dairine funny. Dairine just looked at him. It would be so very bad to punch out a guest on his first day in the house, but really satisfying. So, she shows the rest of them around, and then she has some time alone with her dad and talks with him about what's going on. Tells him, you're taking it all pretty well. And he's like, we agreed to this, so we may as well just fucking roll with it, man. And since Philip isn't going to be eating what we are, and since I'm not operating under the restrictions you are, I'm prepared to prevaricate if I have to. And I was like, okay, that actually does make sense. He is in the speech, but I don't know how much he's using the speech sort of in directly, right? Like the speech is translated from him speaking English automatically, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, I do love that when they're getting down the dishes and everything, and she's like, I'm going to have to really talk to our centipede friend about not eating the plates. I'm going to have to distinctly distinguish between the food and the vessels. He's like, I mean, yeah, we definitely should do that. But also, I have this set of plates I fucking hate. So if he decides he wants to like take a bite out of some of these, I'm not going to be super upset about it. Just saying. And yeah, this has very like mom accidentally breaking the leg lamp in A Christmas Story sort of energy. The problem, as she'd suspected it would be, had been Link. Philip came in to sit at the table in a large bucket of potting soil. Scarrett more or less draped himself over the seat and through the open back of one of the dining room chairs, leaving his front end free to deal with the spaghetti. Dairine's dad only had to warn Scarrett once that they were only eating the things on top of the tablecloth and inside containers. This led to a lively discussion of what humans ate. I really, really enjoy this. It took Link exactly 5 seconds to master the fork and spoon, though he let it be known that at his home, his people use several different kinds of tongs to handle slippery foods like this. He let a number of things be known over the course of dinner, dispensing the occasional fact or opinion as if he expected everybody to be eagerly awaiting his every word, and paying precious little attention to other people's opinions if they came up. His clothes, his possessions, the size of his house, all these came up. What did not come out was anything personal, anything revealing of the inner nature of the entity who sat there at the table, managing the fork and spoon with the grace of someone who'd been using them for years. And Dairine is sort of like unsure if anybody else other than her and her dad is irritated by this. Philip is very quiet and doesn't seem to be responding to everything a ton. Scarrett is just like completely focused on the food or the conversation. And I love this. Dairine increasingly felt like she was doing weight training, and with weights that were getting heavier every minute. Listen, that is the most apt description of being a host during an uncomfortable portion of the evening I've ever heard. It is exhausting. It is so tiring. And as an extroverted introvert, which is what I believe I am, oh boy, you need days to recover after this shit. And she's got 2 weeks ahead of her. I would never. I'm sorry, man. Nobody's coming up in my space and staying with me for more than a couple days. I can't do it. Just can't. I need my fucking time. Thanks, but no. Absolutely not. So at this point, her dad is like, all right, guys, we really need some rest. And they eventually go off and, at first there's a little bit of discussion about how early it is, but her dad is like, no, but seriously, we really need rest. And she talks to him about how shitty Link is. And he's like, I gotta tell you, I still haven't figured out how to cope with people like that. I've run into them, and sometimes you just don't, you have to like bear it until they go away, or they don't go away, and you just have to figure out how to fucking deal with being around them and being irritated all the time, which that is life, kids. And eventually she goes upstairs and reads a little bit further about him. And she finds out about him being like a princeling, sort of. Roshaun of the prince's line of Seraph, son of the Sun Lord, beloved of the Sun Lord, son of the great king, descendant of the inheritors of the great land, the throne destined. It went on for about 6 more epithets, which sounded impressive but were difficult to decipher, and ended in words, royal and kingly masters, guardians, and guarantors of Wellach. Oh my god, Dairine thought. They've sent me some kind of planetary prince. And then realizes, oh, this is the powers that be. They're fucking with me. And that was the first time in all of this that I was like, oh shit, that's amazing. I love it. And she notices too that there's no mention in any of the descriptions of him that he's a wizard. The language, the speech, it should include that detail, and it doesn't. So you know what I was saying, like, maybe he's not supposed to be here, and that's why he didn't put up his World Gator tent. But maybe he's not a wizard. And maybe that's why he's trying so hard to over-impress, because he's really self-conscious that he isn't able to do what they do. How did he, travel here, though, then? Was he sent? I'm interested. But yeah, I feel like maybe that's why he's, he's trying too hard, I don't care, I don't like him. So that is the end of the chapter, is her just sort of thinking about how she's going to cope with this guy. But yeah, this is really fun. This is really, really fun. This is the kind of stuff that I love the most about Diane Duane's writing, is when she gets to just sort of chill and build weird little vignettes like this of other beings in this world that she's created. I find this really fun. So I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again, Yama, for commissioning this. I really appreciate you. I hope that you guys are enjoying the coverage. And I'll be seeing you again next week, I believe, for a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.